Adam O'Leary, Sophie Mann, Encite Branding, Marketing, Creative. Well, probably, right? Yeah, they probably know our names. But for the new viewers, maybe you don't.
First name basis, you know.
Exactly. So how are things going? Things going well?
Pretty good, yeah. I found something interesting this week that I think is sort of the start of like a larger conversation. So we can talk a little bit about the actual case that I found, but it's sort of like, I want to pick your brain a little bit about like what you think this means in the larger context of the industry.
Okay.
So what I found this week is Facebook centered again, as I feel like a lot of what we've talked about recently has been. But there was a case in California where a woman was essentially, she's suing Facebook because she is a woman and she's older and she was needing insurance for like home, car, life, like all of the above.
Okay.
And that's sort of a confusing purchase to make, as we know, working with a client that, you know, services the insurance industry. Like there's some, you know, confusion there. I think that's not like an intuitive thing. It's not like I'm going to the store and buying a Pepsi, right? So she's not getting served any ads from any insurance companies on Facebook, and like notices this because like some men in her life are, and like younger people in her life are. And she's like, that's weird. We live like in the same neighborhood. All of our demographics are the same, except for my age and my gender. And so that's sort of, they're arguing that Facebook is not advertising that product to that demographic that might need it a lot in a lot of those cases, you know? So it's leading into this larger conversation about like algorithms and AI and how that can be sort of inherently discriminatory, whether that's intentional or not, and what that means and how to move forward.
Okay.
Yeah. So just like, where do we go from there? What responsibility does a company like Facebook have, et cetera, that kind of thing.
So, but Facebook's algorithm and their ad platform can be dictated by the advertisers themselves, right? So
yes.
So is it not an option for the advertisers to go towards that demographic if that's not their target market? Is particularly
well, I think that's the thing. Is I think the advertisers, that's part of the argument, is like the advertisers might be interested in her, this specific consumer, but her like Facebook ad algorithm is pushing away those ads for some reason.
Okay.
And like, why is that? And especially when like, I feel like now we're in this culture where women do have a lot more buying power than they did 50 years ago.
Of course.
So why
if not more than anybody else? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And especially for like a major life purchase, like life insurance, it's almost, I think it almost feels like, does she not have the mental capacity to make that purchase? Is, you know, like why is that being pushed to her husband and not her? And is there a larger problem with algorithms being perhaps inherently discriminatory because of the people that are building them, even if it's not like someone set out to make them biased. It's just inherent bias being built in. Right. You know?
Well, this is unique, right? Like this is something that's very interesting because I've never heard of somebody suing because they weren't receiving an ad, right?
And like, that's so like against the status quo, but I think it's an interesting point.
Right, but and valid. And if there is some kind of discriminatory, you know, bias there, then, well, that needs to be addressed. But it's just, you know, most of us are like, I don't want any more ads, right? Like,
exactly.
You know, I don't know. I think that getting into the algorithm itself from Facebook would be interesting to see what comes out of that and see what comes out of the lawsuit. Because that algorithm is so super complex, right? Like, and it's supposed to be of a benefit to both advertisers and consumers, right? Like we want, as advertisers, as marketers, we want an ad that's going to a specific person, right? That target market, right? And that's a benefit to us that we can do that. So I'd be interested to see where that goes, but you know, that algorithm, you know, maybe there's a glitch. I mean, that machine is, I mean, I can't wrap my head around that whole machine, right?
Not at all. That's so technical.
But if that's something that's a glitch, it's also a benefit to advertisers to get that fixed, right? Because then if my target market is women, middle-aged, who are in the market for life insurance, because, you know, millennials aren't probably thinking about life insurance. They're like, whatever. So that would be a a detriment to me as a advertiser, as a business, because I need to get in front of them. So that needs to get fixed either way.
Right, exactly.
It just seems like me, the advertisers would be one to be like, hey, fix this because I need to get to my target market, not the target market.
Exactly. And I just, the fact that it was Facebook caught my eye, of course, because I feel like, I mean, this is a photo of Mark Zuckerberg in front of the, judiciary. Yeah. So he's there a lot. I feel like there's constantly some sort of issue regarding either privacy or the discriminatory algorithm or whatever the case may be. We're talking about them a lot, and I feel like it hasn't really been super positive recently. And I'm just like, when are we going to figure that out? Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I guess that's kind of Mark Zuckerberg's new, job role, right?
Right.
Spends a lot of time
He's
in
like
court.
PR court guy. Yeah.
Has to be.
But yeah, I was just super interested by that. And you make a good point about the whole, like, most people don't want to see more ads, but I do think I would notice if I was seeing no ads for a particular subset, like none at all. Like if I were to just like never see a shoe ad again, I think I would notice that. Yeah. And I think that it's interesting that she was like, wait, I have no insurance of any kind on here,
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's something that needs to be worked out, whether it's, detrimental to an advertiser or where it's discriminatory, it needs to be fixed.
Yeah. And you make a good point about it sort of being both, like that, because they're losing money potentially on her, and she's also not able to make this, an intimidating purchase.
Exactly. Right.
So anyway, I think that's something that maybe we should revisit, but like the larger conversation about how the industry can be more inclusive in terms of the tactics that we use to go after people,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just intriguing.
Yeah, that's cool. It's interesting.
So what about you? What are we talking about this week?
I think we're going through an Encite creative or Encite marketing option. So this is kind of going along the same lines of what you were talking about, right? Like, Apple did the iOS update.
Yeah.
And we talked about that on a previous show.
Yes. Call back for our loyal viewers.
Yep, for sure. So we talked about that update and some of the Facebook algorithm changes to how they can serve ads to people.
Right,
so some numbers came in.
Okay.
And I think you saw this too, right?
Yeah.
So it had some pretty profound effect on users and some pretty interesting stats.
Yeah, that 4% is a small number.
Right.
Yeah.
4% of people have only consented to allow ads to be targeted to them. Right.
Yeah.
So, and that was, I think specifically the app, it doesn't do it on every single app, right? But it only does it when you download a new app or you update another app. Yeah.
So it doesn't prompt you unless it's a new download or, like you said, an update to something that you've already had. But like I, for instance, already have a lot of what I don't remember the last time I downloaded like a new app. I feel like I have pretty much all that I use. So I would have to go in and manually make that change in my settings.
Right.
But to cover everything. But if it's like, let's say I decide to download, some, I don't know, like a new app today, then that's going to prompt me. And I'm of course going to be like, no.
Yeah. Right.
On the tracking. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but another thing was interesting. It's kind of that this whole thing hands back control of the app, to the individual, the tracking to the individual, in that express permission that's required. But then they can do that across the board, but the across the board opt out isn't as small as that 4%. So because it's buried in the kind of thing, they have to do those couple things.
I'll be honest with you, I haven't done it yet, only because I'm like, and I know it's going to take 5 minutes, but I still don't want to search for it.
I get it.
You know, but I would totally, the next time I download something, I would totally turn it off.
Right.
Yeah. And I also thought, because that 4%, that's 2.5 million people that they got that number from, which is that's a huge segment. Because sometimes I feel like you see a percentage and you're like, how many users are we actually tracking?
Right.
And that's substantial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is kind of what it comes back as, it's 3%. That comes back to that number of how many people have opted completely out. Only 3% of people have actually opted out of everything. But eventually, as your apps update, as you get new apps, eventually you're going to opt out of that tracking software. But that's a good number for Facebook, right? That only 3% have actually globally opted out of that stuff, which is nice for them.
Yeah. And again, like, I mean, this is early, you know, so who knows where it's going. But yeah, it's crazy that those are already the numbers.
Right. And I think what's more profound too is the worldwide numbers, you know, the opt-in rates still aren't good. They're still only at 12%. So it seems like people out of the United States are a little less, you know, they don't opt out as much, which is interesting.
That's interesting. I wonder if that has anything to do with like the climate of advertising abroad. Obviously, I don't know a ton about, you know, what that market is like outside of the US, but I wonder if it's a little less or more invasive. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But so we got the numbers back. So it's kind of the ramifications, you know, obviously bad news for Facebook.
Right.
You know, it's, Facebook says that it's kind of this kind of thing undermines the ability to get to targeted advertising and help small business, which they're primarily promoting. I mean, there's a lot of Fortune 500 kind of work on Facebook, of course, but there's a lot of small businesses. We do a lot of small business advertising for clients.
Right.
So that's kind of hurting those clients. But,
and that's a fair point.
Right. But it still comes back to some of the things that we talked about, getting creative of how we're continuing to market and use those pieces. So there's other things that we can do, right?
Right.
Well, do you remember what we talked about? What are some of those other things that we did from a marketing standpoint on Facebook to get back into retargeting people?
Well, I mean, it's like you can easily like who's already interacted with you on a certain level, you know? And like I've said this 100, I feel like every time we talk about the subject, I say this, but I think it's like, it's a good challenge, you know, it does make it more difficult to like immediately get to that person, but it's also like, how can we creatively reach that person?
Right.
You know, and I do understand there is the small business element and everything, but yeah, I think it's just, let's get better about how we're advertising. Let's get more creative at how we're reaching people and hopefully still get to where we need to be seen, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing about this that's just interesting is Apple's kind of positioned itself as kind of like a consumer champion.
Yeah. Right.
By kind of alleviating and giving people options to opt out of that kind of thing. But it's still, I mean, it still kind of hurts them for their advertising, correct? But they've always been kind of
they came out early on against the sort of Facebook angle of this, where like this is going to be bad, and there was because Facebook came out with like a clapback ad that we talked about right when Apple announced this, which so that's sort of been an interesting dynamic because they're like two tech giants, you know. But yeah, I feel like that's always been Apple's brand, you know, power to the people, like that's
Apple's
so
very much a culture, right?
Yes.
Like, and so it's very much people kind of have their identity tied to a lot of Apple products. And this just kind of reinforces that as like, we're all kind of.
This totally, their stance on this totally makes me think of that 1984 like Big Brother ad that they're known for that came out in like the 80s or whatever.
Were you even alive in the 80s?
No, but I of course studied that in college, you know?
Nice.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple other ramifications on these kinds of things, but you know, we'll see kind of like what kind of plays out.
Yeah, this has been really interesting to follow, I will say. Yeah.
And for us as advertisers, we've kind of started to do some other kind of changes on our Facebook advertising using, you know, events, using groups, you know, there's still those options to get there, to get that, to retargeting those people. You can do it that way. So there's some other things that maybe we'll talk about in another marketing segment.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely think we'll continue to keep you guys updated on this because there seems to be a new article about it every week. So it is not that difficult. But yeah, I mean, I think we did actually a tutorial about how to turn that off in a previous episode. So if you're interested, definitely check that out. And otherwise, we will talk to you next week.
Sounds good.
Thanks for checking in, guys. Bye.